It is page 900 in your pew Bible. It is Luke 9, beginning with verse 28 in your own Bible. We are only going to read through the 36th verse. I thought I could speak to that part from 37 to 43, but I'm going to be lucky just to cover the Transfiguration this morning. So we'll just read to verse 36. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his countenance was altered, and his raiment became dazzling white. And behold, 2 men talked with him, Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his departure, which he was to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and those who were with him were heavy with sleep, and when they wakened, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. And as the men were parting from him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is well that we're here. Let us make 3 booths, one for you and one for Moses and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. As he said this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were afraid as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud, saying, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." And when the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone. And they kept silence and told no one in those days anything of what they had seen. May the Lord add his blessing to the reading of his word. how it started out. Jesus, take us to the mountain. And then what do you want us to see there? That's good questions for us this morning. A good while back on a Easter Sunday, I had the privilege of being the one in the pulpit to say, "The Lord is risen." And the people said, "He is risen indeed." And there was a candle on the communion table, and the flame on that went about that high. Put a little jolt in all who saw it. And I remember one of our youth said to me, "Did you see that? Did you see that?" I think the Lord did that. I think the Lord was telling us He is risen indeed. I don't know if the Lord was pulling back the curtain a little bit that Easter morning or not, but it wouldn't surprise me. After all, it was Easter, and we were celebrating. How comfortable are you with the mystery of God? Do you feel foolish telling someone about an experience you've had with God? Does it feel sort of like you've had an alien encounter? Are they going to believe this? I have a brother-in-law who, when he was a teenager, he will tell you vividly how he had sort of an extraterrestrial experience. And I don't doubt for a minute that happened to him. But I know every time he tells it, he feels some embarrassment. He wonders, who is believing him? I think sometimes we're like that with our faith. We're supposed to be so rational. We're supposed to be so science-minded, you know. I'm supposed to stand up here and be able to tell you why that candle jumped up like that. Well, you know, the wick was too long. I don't know. Science can tell us how something happens. Can't tell us why, though. We know scientifically what happens with a rainbow, or if you Google it. If I Google it, I can tell you. Google is my other brain, the bigger brain. But I can't tell you why we get to have rainbows, except I turn back to Noah. And I read what God told Noah about his promise. You know, I can tell you why babies happen. We won't do that here today. But about, you know, there are things in the physical body and hormones and stuff like that. Doctors can tell you, scientists can tell us. But why do two people feel drawn to each other enough to commit their lives to each other and to stay committed long after those hormones are hardly even there anymore? Science can tell us how or what, maybe, but not why. A long time ago, I was at Disney World with a friend of mine who worked for Disney. I don't think she does anymore, but she made me aware of something I did not know anything about. Do y'all know about hidden Mickeys? Know about hidden Mickeys? Hidden Mickeys. I mean, we went into the dining room of the Beauty and the Beast castle, and she had just started telling me about this thing. And I looked up in the ceiling, you know, they have painted the ceiling like a sky, and there's clouds and so forth up there. And I looked up there, and I saw that the shape of one of the clouds was Mickey Mouse's head. And she had told me that all over the park, in the wallpaper in the Haunted Mansion, you know, in all kinds of places, were these hidden Mickeys. And there were games with it and contests with it and all kinds of things. I never even knew any of that was there. A Mickey Mouse head, big deal. But it got me to thinking about evidences of God all around us. And do we see them? I think we so easily miss them. We so easily make God into our own image We make God a weak human being without realizing it, the way we think of God, the way we come to God in our prayers. Well, sort of like the one who said, if you're willing, or if you can, Jesus, will you do this? And Jesus was saying, if I can, I think we do that. This story gives us a chance to remember again that we serve a limitless, all-powerful God, and that Jesus was not just a human being, and that one day that tiny little baby that was placed in that feed box of hay, that one will appear completely transfigured and not changing in his countenance, but will remain in that glorified state. And we will see this one that we have worshiped for so long. And we'll think, why didn't I trust you more? Why didn't I pray more boldly to you? Why didn't I believe more than I did? You were right there in front of me. I guess like a hidden Mickey. We're in the last Sunday of the season of Epiphany, season of light, the season of revelation. We began with his birth, the light of the world, now in it, now one of us. Then his baptism, this one from God, fully identifying with us as human beings. The story of the water to wine, how Jesus is the one in whom is all joy. And then how he states his mission. He stands up in the synagogue and says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to bring good news to the poor, to heal the lame, bring sight to the blind, proclaim God's coming. Then he, among many things, but the story for this year, revealed his power in a great catch of fish that he told Peter to go for by casting his net over the side, even though he doubted. He saw the power of Jesus and said, depart from me, I'm a man of sinful lips. I don't deserve to be in your presence. Saw Jesus' power. Then the sixth Sunday of Epiphany, the Beatitudes. How is it that he came to live, and how is it that we're to live as his followers? And then a continued Sermon on the Mount, his wisdom, his teaching. And then today, plainly for us to see his deity, his glory, not given to him by God, but no, as God, his own divinity, the one with all authority, the one God said, no, wait, Peter, listen to him. What happened up there? Let's think about just some of the things the story tells us. 3 disciples, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him up that mountain. Quite a climb, almost 2 miles. They think it was Mount Hermon. Some say Mount Tabor, but there were settlements up there. It was a much smaller mountain. Somewhere in the heights of Hermon, they went. Why only 3? Were they the only ones willing to go? Now, Jesus did frequently, or with some frequency, take these 3 men with him. Maybe he chose them. Maybe because they were ready. They were ready for this experience. Why did it happen on a mountain? Mountains throughout the Bible, mountains are the places of God's activity, the places where God meets humans in their thinking. And so Moses received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. And Elijah heard that still small voice in a cave up on top of Mount Horeb, which some think is actually the other side of Mount Sinai. and now they're at Mount Hermon. Why Moses and Elijah? Well, these were the two greats in Judaism. These were the two. Moses represented the giving of the law, God's written word, written with his own finger, tablets of stone. And Elijah represented the prophets, God's proclaimed, preached, spoken, corrective word, living and active, calling people to repentance. But Jesus was the Word made flesh, God's living Word. So here they were, the two in the cloud and Jesus also glorified. Now, how did the disciples who told Luke, how did they know that this was Moses and Elijah? I mean, I don't think they were wearing our little Thursday night community meal, hello, my name is, name badges there. How did they know? I mean, and they didn't have, presumably in the synagogue, their painted pictures on the wall. Somehow they knew. Somehow they knew. Maybe it was their conversation. Because we're told that they were talking about Jesus' exodus. Interesting word, exodus. The same word used for the Israelites' release from slavery in Egypt. Jesus' exodus from this life, from all that he came to accomplish here for us, his impending death, his resurrection, and then his ascension. Why, though? Why were they talking about this? Well, Jesus, for Moses, he was the fulfillment of the law. His life lived the law. He was fulfilling the requirements of the law for us to atone for the sin of the world. And for Elijah, he was the promised one right there, the Messiah, the one that he had spoken of and the prophets had spoken of. When did this happen? Well, from what we can gather, it was 2 or 3 weeks before the cross. And why did it happen? Well, I believe, with those I've read, their scholarship, that this was to strengthen Jesus for what he was about to go through. We're told from the Greek language in the preceding chapters that it wasn't just one time that Jesus said, I'm going to go to the cross. I'm going to be killed by Romans. I'm going to be beaten. I'm going to die. And Peter said, may it never be. Don't talk like that. This went on many times. Back and forth. How wearying. How many times Jesus must have said, oh, that it weren't. Oh, that this was not to be my fate in the near future. Don't say this to me anymore. Get behind me, Satan. Remember, he said that to Peter one of those times. Now, Jesus needed an experience of God to see him through those coming days. And I believe those disciples did too. They needed not only that, they had no idea what was coming. They weren't, as we have already said, internalizing it. But they needed to see that this one who had been a great miracle worker, this one who was an amazing teacher, this one who even had power over nature, they still weren't getting it. This is God. This is God before you in the flesh. So here was an experience from God to see that, to know that, to have that assurance. And so Jesus' clothing glowed from a light within him, and his face changed Try to imagine that. And Peter, who is so prone to just blurt things out. Can you relate? No, I can relate. Oh, let's just stay here. Let's just stay here. Let's forget about all that crosstalk, Jesus. Let's just build you and Moses and Elijah some tabernacles. We're about to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. So let's just put our tabernacles up here. And let's just celebrate what God does and how he's glorified you and brought these leaders of our faith here. Let's just stay here. Let's just stay on the mountain. But you can't stay there. And there are crosses. I've been thinking about times when I felt like God came to me and pulled back the curtain for me to help me get through something. I remember at first, the very first time that I was really facing something, and I had my Bible and I was underlining everything just feverishly and saying that's for me and that's for me, and really without realizing it, telling God what all those things meant too. And you know what they meant? They meant that God wasn't going to let me suffer. That's what that verse meant. So I was claiming those things. And then I found out that I'd gotten it wrong. And I was about to have a really tough time. So I got disappointed. I was mad. I was mad at God. And I put my Bible aside. I didn't pray. And after a while, I found out how alone and miserable you can feel. And how much God really had been with me and helping me. But I wasn't paying attention. Because I wanted God to do what I wanted God to do. Until finally one day, because God wasn't doing what I wanted God to do, I felt like blackest night just came down on me. Because I said, I think with the help of a spiritual enemy, great help from a spiritual enemy, there is no God. I was sitting there in misery. There is no God. There is no God. And then God pulled back the curtain. I was in that darkness, but God came and said, get out of here. And this might sound crazy, but it's just true, okay? I felt a presence pull away from me, like you were peeling off tape off your skin. And I felt that God came to me in that moment and saved me from that darkness. I like to tell you that things changed right away after that, but they didn't. I still wanted God to show me and say to me what I wanted him to show me and say to me. I still wanted him to just plain pluck me out of that misery. But then God showed me himself in some other ways. They weren't what I was looking for. They were hidden Mickeys. But he showed me. And so I started asking God to tell me what his word meant. And I started asking God to help me go his way. And I started asking God for God's will to be done in my life. And I found out that God wanted to heal me of more than illness. And I found peace with God after that. I found God coming to me, and I'll tell you one or two. There was a woman who always cared. She was a great prayer warrior, and she came to me and said, I want to pray you through the worst of this. So the next time you go to the hospital, I want to pray you through the night. I was going. So I said, well, it's this Thursday. So she said, all right, well, I'm going to get up, because I had told her 2 to 5 in the morning. I said, but you don't want to get up then. You'll wake up your husband. And look, just pray for me some other time of day. God will transfer it over. She said, no, I'm praying you through it. So I went to the hospital, and they ran these tests on me, and they said, you're not ready for us to do more here. You need to go home, come back in 2 weeks. So I went home, went to church Sunday, and Connie came running up to me with tears in her eyes. She said, oh, I am so sorry. I'm so sorry. I never woke up. Was it horrible? Was it horrible? I just started crying and laughing at the same time. I said, Connie, God didn't wake you up because I didn't have the treatment. And we just celebrated. Just celebrated. So many times like that. Times when I thought I wasn't going to make it through another time in the hospital, and then I'd have a Christian roommate. Another time, an orderly came in, and he spent about an hour encouraging me in Christian scriptures and, in experiences he'd had. I never saw him again. I always wanted to share my faith with my doctor. Never had a chance until I had a final meeting with him. And then he was very curious to know why it was that I could think about not having another surgery just to make sure I was all clear and fine. And I shared how it was God who had gotten me through all of it. There were so many times, we had a youth lock-in, and right in the middle of all this craziness, this impromptu talent show, one of my kids come over and said, Susan, are you going to die? Or I'd be singing a hymn, and God would catch me right in the middle of it. From sinking sand, he lifted me with tender hand. He lifted me. From plains, shades of night to plains of light. Oh, praise his name. He lifted me. Pulled back the curtain. Pulled back the curtain. And so now I'd rather have God's will than mine. And I'd rather hope in God than any circumstance. I'd rather have the real God than the version I made. Because to have him is to have life. And I'm grateful when he pulls back the curtain still. And I'm in the car listening to music, and he sidles up. He comes along when you all are singing. Or Peter, with that organ. Those chords become part of you. Or we're praying, and suddenly you can't say anymore. Or in the silence. And listen, wherever we're at, whatever we're going through, whatever we need, don't you doubt for a minute that God knows what you need. And don't you stop looking for those hidden Mickeys, those evidences of his presence and his power and his love. Don't you stop looking. Would you pray with me? Oh God, whatever you want of us this morning for understanding, for yielding, for faith, for obeying you. Oh God, may your will be done. Whatever you might lead us to do, may we do it. In this time that you invite us to listen to you and consider these things. In Jesus' name, amen. And so we have